Hey Teddy, we could tell your friends about your favorite subject. We're talking about sleep today. You get about 18 hours per day of sleep. Yeah. Why don't you get a job? Or not. Why, hello again, endurance nerds. Today I'd like to talk about a very important subject matter. A matter that I'm pretty sure that you suck at.
You suck, you jackass. Why don't you shut the hell up?
Don't leave, it's okay. We're just talking here, we're just friends, we're in this together. Talking YouTube science. Got my t-shirt on. If you haven't already checked out Matt's channel, you should probably do so. Links in the show notes down below. Buy a t-shirt, it's good stuff. But I very frequently talk about the importance of recovery on this channel. And while the concept of recovery is seemingly simple, it's actually a multivariate and ever-changing landscape that requires us to be pretty deliberate in our approach. Recovery is not as simple as just throwing our feet up every once in a while. Done properly, it involves nutrition, proper periodization between workouts, physical rehabilitation, and the most restorative, and the one that we seem to respect the least, is sleep. In this video, I want to provide 5 actionable tips that can help you to improve the quality and the quantity of your sleep and help you to understand why. I want to go beyond the platitudes of sleep more or sleep is important, because saying those things means we have it all figured out, right? It would be nice if it were just that simple, but given the ever-increasing distractions and responsibilities, we need to be more mindful than ever about our sleep, especially if we want to optimize your performance in any discipline, but endurance sport in particular. The tips I'm going to talk about aren't hacks or tricks. They are going to require you to make a decision to prioritize your sleep to whatever degree you decide creates balance in your life, and do so purposely, executing on one or several of these tips. Now, this list is certainly not exhaustive, but rather a handful of strategies that I believe can elicit a high return on investment. While not the target, these may help with some disordered sleep patterns, but are certainly not a cure. I myself have struggled with bouts of insomnia, and sometimes these strategies have helped me to get back on track, but I am not promising they will work for you. These tips are more directed for the general audience, the ones that might just struggle with doing the right things around sleep. It's also important to understand that the body of science around sleep, biology, hormones, etc., it's vast, and I think most, if not all of you, understand that. But I will be mentioning concepts and terms that I might just gloss over in this video. Many of those concepts could create 15 to 20 minute videos all on their own. I feel that this day and age, I have to give the disclaimer that my failure to go into detail on every single thing that I mention is not an attempt to be dishonest or disingenuous, nor is it a reflection that I don't understand the subject matter. It's in the interest of time. My videos tend to be long to begin with. I need to focus the in-depth discussion on the meat and potatoes of the video. I am making the presupposition that you either have a basic understanding of some of these concepts or can do some additional research on your own. And I will leave some helpful resources in the show notes below. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into the tips. The first tip, and this might be the toughest one to act on, is knowing your chronotype. It may surprise you to know that we are all biologically predisposed to certain sleep and wake times. Many people simply acknowledge that we are diurnal beings that awake during the day and sleep at night, and we follow a certain circadian rhythm around the rising and setting of the sun. We understand that we wake in the morning with daylight, and our body temperature and our energy increases throughout the morning as they reach their peak. We see a dip in temperature and energy in the afternoon, just to see another rise and peak early in the evening until we see substantial decline into the late evening, sleep pressure builds, and we fall asleep and begin the cycle all over again. Societies and civilizations are built around this normative pattern, and the majority of people have built their own routines around this structure. But much like almost everything else in life, there is variation. We are not all biologically primed to sleep and wake up at the same time. It is not as simple as habituating yourself to the society's clock and the body will thrive. Your hormone production and release is actually hard-coded at birth. You will fall into a particular chronotype that will determine when your body wants to sleep. You've all heard the terms night owl or early bird, but there's actually some science behind that. You have genes that will determine which you are. You may very well be living at odds with your chronotype, and just because you get the correct number of hours of sleep does not mean that that sleep will be restorative or of quality. Understanding what your chronotype is may allow you to make some decisions or changes to place your sleeping patterns more in line with your biology. Now, I've linked the morningness eveningness questionnaire, or the MEQ, down below. It doesn't require an email or login. It's a simple, free-to-use tool. It's based in science. It will take you about 5 minutes to answer a series of questions about how you might freely plan your day, the tasks you might perform, how you feel you will perform in those tasks, and at the end it will give you a pretty decent appraisal of your chronotype. And those chronotypes are split up into 5 different categories: extreme evening, evening, neutral, morning, and extreme morning. You will receive your preferred sleep and wake times, and you could potentially match those up against your routine, and it might elicit some understandings and insights about your energy and performance throughout the day. Now, the science seems to indicate that you cannot drastically switch your chronotype. That is to say, an extreme evening person will not be able to turn themselves into an extreme morning. Now, they might be able to habituate to that particular schedule, but their hormone production and peak alertness will be perpetually mismatched. But there is some flexibility that you might be able to use to shift yourself more towards either the center line or more towards a routine that fits your life requirements. Let's use this example. Let's say that you take the test and you turn out to be an evening person, and your preferred bedtime is somewhere around midnight, and your preferred wake time is maybe around 8 o'clock a.m. However, your current routine is to go to bed at 10 o'clock and wake up at 5 a.m. You do your workout from 5:30 to 7, and then you have to be at work by 8 o'clock a.m. You might find that you struggle with energy throughout the day, or that your performance is inhibited. You might be thinking, well, I get 7 hours of sleep. That's not too bad, right? Why am I struggling so much? And it's likely because you're pretty substantially mismatched against your chronotype. With that understanding, you might be able to ask some questions about your routine. Is there something you can change? Would you be able to move your bedtime later? Perhaps somewhere around 11:30, and wake up at 6:30 or 7. You get ready and you go to work, moving your workout to later in the day. If you were only doing that early morning workout because you feel like it's some killer morning routine or that it makes you feel more productive with your time, you may be doing yourself a disservice and hurting your performance both mentally and physically. I don't mean to infer that changing your routine is that simple. You may not have the luxury and flexibility of doing so, and it's pretty clear that our societies are built around norms that are disproportionately punitive to those night owls out there. But my point is that you should ask the questions and see if you can make some small tweaks or changes that could help to better align you with your biology. It might help you to know that being a night owl is not a reflection of your discipline or a sign that you are lazy, but rather determined by your biology. I recommend at least taking the questionnaire and seeing what you can discover about yourself. Tip number 2 is to manage your light exposure. It has become a pretty overused trope these days to talk about using your mobile devices before bed and blue light, selling you things like blue light glasses and apps that change the color temperature on your phone, and there is certainly science to support that. Blue light is the most egregious in tricking the brain and interrupting hormone release to invite and maintain sleep. While blue light blocking glasses and screen changes might be able to mitigate some of that, and to be clear, we don't have more robust research on that yet, we are kind of missing the greater point. Light in general is a signal for the suprachiasmatic nucleus to regulate our circadian rhythm that is synchronized with changes in exposures to light from the sun. We have changed our lives in a modern society to be pretty hyper-reliant on artificial light that sends conflicting signals to the brain and invariably alters the behavior of hormones in some capacity. Concentrating that light exposure, especially with devices held inches from our face, simply exacerbates that condition, and it interrupts signals from the pineal gland to release melatonin. Any light is disruptive to the release of melatonin, and electric light in particular can delay that release by 2 to 3 hours. Now, that does not mean you need to be sitting in pitch blackness before bed, but reducing the amount of artificial light in your surroundings as you approach bedtime can signal the brain to release melatonin more appropriately. The mobile device usage before bed simply requires discipline. Abstinence from mobile devices an hour before bedtime can be a game changer in a couple of ways. I will speak more of that in tip number 3, but focusing right now on the light piece, reading from a mobile device has been shown to decrease melatonin production by 50% and delay its release by up to 3 hours. Can you switch that out for something like a book, listening to some music, or even a little bit of television, maybe set a little bit further away, could be an improvement over just the mobile device. But it is not just your mobile devices. Ambient light also plays a role. Sitting in your living room with all of your lights on at full intensity has an impact as well. With smart devices becoming much more accessible, we can help that situation by using dimming and intensity features to signal that it's time for bed. I have Philips Hue lights. They start to dim around 1 hour before the bedtime I have set in my system, and over the course of that hour, the lights dim more and more until they turn off completely. And as it's happening, it's really not terribly noticeable, but it is sending a signal to my brain that it's time to start releasing melatonin and it's time for bed. You don't necessarily need some fancy technological solution, but rather just think about your environment before bed. If you're going to watch a TV show or movie, maybe you just turn the surrounding lights completely off or dim them a bit. If you're reading, maybe you just rely on a single small side table lamp or a book light rather than illuminating the entire environment or the entire room. Little tweaks can send big signals to the brain and prepare the body for sleep. But don't only focus on falling asleep when it comes to light, it actually plays a role in staying asleep as well. Light in your environment will still hit your retina even while you're sleeping, and that in turn will interrupt the release of melatonin throughout your sleep cycles and disrupt the quality of your sleep. You might want to try to clean your environment and eliminate as much light pollution as possible. Blackout curtains are one of those things that come very highly recommended. It helps to block out some of the things like street lights or changes in sunrise and sunset throughout the year. But even with blackout curtains, don't forget what's inside of your environment or in your room as well. Falling asleep with the TV on, for instance, can be very problematic. You have a large flickering light source blasting you while you sleep. If you need the TV on to fall asleep, make sure that you set a timer so that it will turn itself off and won't interrupt your sleep cycles throughout the night. Phone screens that might wake themselves up with notifications, illuminated clocks, set-top boxes, small LEDs, all of these can actually have an impact on your sleep. Now, this isn't an attempt at hyperbole to get you to throw every last thing out of your room, but something to be cognizant of. For me, I find it easier and more cost-effective to just block out the environment rather than to restructure it. I just use a simple face mask. You can find these pretty much anywhere online and they're pretty inexpensive, but you just want to look at something that's going to block out all of the light coming from the periphery. You can kind of see that the way that this mask is shaped, it will sit on the cheekbones and seal up around the top of the brow and no light can get in, but ensuring that it takes the actual shade itself and lifts it away from the eyes so you have no pressure on top of the eyelids or touching the eyelashes that will interrupt the natural movement of your eyes. These are usually made of a material that stay pretty cool at night so it doesn't cause heat buildup or sweat. And I'm a pretty light sleeper and I'm pretty sensitive to things touching my face or extra pressure on my head, but I have no problem falling asleep with these. And I find these to be very effective at blocking out ambient light. And I find that when I do use it, I wake up feeling a little bit more refreshed. Just something that you might want to look into. There are a number of different ways to address the environmental light concerns, but do as much as you can to mitigate the ambient light in the room, and it will vastly improve the quality of your sleep. Tip number 3 is limiting stimulation. I don't think anybody is going to dispute that when we focus on a task or are engaged in solving a problem, we become much more alert. We bring our various senses and our brains online to process the information or task at hand. We need to be cautious about the things that we engage in as we approach bedtime. This is where mobile devices can become very pernicious. We may think that it is harmless to jump into bed with phone in hand and scroll through social media or read some articles, but depending on what you are engaged with, you may be activating that problem-solving routine in your brain and increasing alertness rather than allowing it to decrease and sleep pressure to build. Whether it is something exciting, agitating, or novel information, exposing yourself to stimulation that is endemic to modern society can be counterproductive to sleep. I have been guilty of this myself. I stumble across something on my phone and end up down this rabbit hole of searching other things, communicating about the material, or simply trying to absorb or understand new material. What I might have expected to last 15 minutes could give way to hours, and suddenly I find myself awake far later than I had expected. And this can come by way of a lot of activities. I mentioned before activities like watching TV or reading a book. Perhaps watching that serialized Netflix drama isn't the best choice, getting caught up in the suspense when you should be allowing your brain to turn off and go to sleep. Reading those dense nonfiction books with citations and data and things that are teaching you something new might not be the best time to do that right before bed. I'm not trying to tell you what you're allowed to engage with before bed, but rather to have you be critical of the stimulation you are inviting into that nightly routine and how that might be impacting your sleep. Can you switch to something lighter, something more passive, maybe some light fiction or a comedy that you won't be intensely focused on to absorb every last detail, something that will allow your brain to eventually turn off and give way to sleep. Think about what you do before bed. Is it keeping you awake? Tip number 4 is regarding controlling temperature. And I've already foreshadowed this a little bit throughout the video in speaking to the circadian rhythm. Your internal body temperature increases with alertness and energy and decreases as alertness drops and sleep pressure builds. Much like light, we function with temperature-controlled environments, and we don't necessarily expose ourselves to the variation in ambient temperature outdoors that typically triggers those changes throughout the day. When people drink coffee or tea, they often feel immediately alert, and that is not from the caffeine. It's from the increase in core body temperature that comes from drinking something hot. When you want to promote good quality sleep, you would like to reverse that process. Studies have indicated that about 68 degrees Fahrenheit is the ideal ambient temperature for sleeping. Now, for many, that is a few degrees too cool to feel comfortable when you are not actively moving around. And that doesn't mean you cannot have blankets or warmer clothing on. It's simply the ambient temperature that helps to trigger the internal response while you are asleep so that you maximize the quality of your sleep cycles. You can also trigger that reduction in body temperature manually before bed, which can be especially helpful if you're anything like me and you train later in the day and your body temperature could be elevated later in the evening. You can do this by drinking something cold, eating something cold. What I find to be very helpful is to take a hot shower, and once I get out, the contrast in skin temperature elicits a response in blood flow and a subsequent drop in core body temperature, helping me to increase my readiness for sleep. The same can be said for hot tubs, saunas, steam rooms, etc. And while it seems counterintuitive to heat treat yourself to lower your core body body temperature, it can actually be very effective. The moral of the story is that the body temperature tracks well with alertness. You can use that understanding to enhance on those rhythms throughout the day and improve your sleep. Finally, tip number 5 is going to combine two things that aren't really related, but for the fact that they both negatively impact sleep, and that is to be cautious about alcohol and caffeine. I don't think the idea of avoiding caffeine before bed requires a ton of convincing. Caffeine is a stimulant, and stimulants in general are somewhat mutually exclusive with proper sleep, understanding that everybody's sensitivity is a little bit different. But what might not be as obvious is that timing and dose is actually quite important. You might not be consuming caffeine in the evening, but it does not mean your daily coffee habit isn't disrupting your sleep. Caffeine has a half-life of about 5 to 7 hours, so that coffee that you drank at 3 p.m. is still working its way through your system while you're sleeping. Depending on how much you drank throughout the day, the amount in the system could be pretty substantial throughout the night. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors, reducing the sleep pressure that you feel and thus your ability to fall asleep and stay asleep. I am not by any measure suggesting that you eliminate coffee from your routine, but rather be mindful of the timing and the dose. A good rule of thumb is to cut off coffee consumption about 10 hours before bedtime to allow the caffeine to metabolize and wear off during the more wakeful portions of the day and have the least impact on your sleep. Also, be wary of decaf. Many people think decaf is not caffeinated or caffeine-free, and that is absolutely not the case. Decaf coffee is nowhere near zero caffeine. It generally contains about 15 to 30% of the caffeine found in regular coffee. So watch out drinking that after dinner decaf coffee. If you enjoy a nice hot beverage after a meal, maybe opt instead for something like an herbal tea, or even a hot cocoa has a very small amount of caffeine, around 5 milligrams, but that should not significantly impact sleep, and it might satiate your desire for that hot beverage. Now let's talk about alcohol. And this is a touchy subject for a lot of people, but the science is clear. Alcohol is absolutely terrible for your sleep. People have a hard time wrapping their head around this because alcohol is a sedative, and it actually causes a person to lose consciousness faster. But losing that consciousness is not entering naturalistic sleep. Alcohol stimulates the autonomic nervous system, which causes excited breathing, temperature, heart rate patterns, etc. All of those interrupt sleep cycles, most heavily impacting that very important REM sleep that is necessary for restoration. As alcohol wears off, people tend to awaken prematurely, offsetting any potential benefit of falling asleep earlier with the assistance of alcohol. The half-life of alcohol is similar to caffeine at 4 to 5 hours, but clearly getting around that is much more problematic. Most of us don't have the luxury of sitting around day drinking and cutting off that consumption around noon. Alcohol is much more limited in its flexibility because of the laws, social mores, and the reduced cognitive function that comes with it. While abstinence is the ideal approach when it comes to optimizing for sleep and performance, people need to live and enjoy their lives. I get it. The key here is to understand the trade-offs and make intelligent decisions around your alcohol consumptions beyond the simple idea of just drink responsibly. Perhaps you forego that nightcap the night before a busy day or a heavy training load and save it for another night. We're all adults here. We're all capable of using discretion. The point of this tip is that you have the information to make the decisions that will promote your goals. I know there are a plethora of other great tips to help promote good sleep hygiene and habits. My hope was to provide 5 that tend to address issues that might be more entrenched in our lifestyles or that are so taken for granted that people are often ignorant to the effects or consequences. If you have any tips of your own, leave them down below. We can all learn from one another. If you did get any value out of this video, please hit that thumbs up button. It helps the algorithm to put this video out in front of more people for whom this might be helpful. Click one of the videos up over here. Subscribe if you haven't already. All of the YouTubey stuff. And as always, I will catch you in the next one. See ya.